was a tough time for me because I enjoyed the Griffith show so much.
He made millions laugh. But behind the wire...
It was a tough time for me because I enjoyed the Andy Griffith Show so much. Don Knotts made America laugh, but his own life was filled with tears. He grew up with a violent, alcoholic father who once held knives to his throat. This trauma haunted him forever. Even while winning 5 Emmys, he struggled with panic attacks so severe that he could barely function. In his final years, he faced another cruel twist, going blind from macular degeneration and eventually dying of lung cancer. This is the story of a man who brought joy to millions but rarely found it himself. Don Knotts was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, in 1924, 14 years after his next oldest sibling. His parents hadn't planned on having another child. His mother was 40, his father was struggling to support the family, and they had just lost their farm. There was no money, no comfort, and certainly no room for a new baby. Don slept on a cot in the kitchen while his older brothers shared a room with boarders to help pay the rent. There was no privacy, no space of his own, just noise, stress, and the constant reminder they were barely surviving. He was small, sickly, and wore second-hand clothes that never fit. Kids made fun of him at school. At home, things were worse. His father William was nearly blind, mentally ill, and an alcoholic. Most days he lay on the sofa, unpredictable and violent. Don had to pass him just to get out the door. Sometimes his father would threaten him with a knife. Don once said, "I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time." When he was 13, his father died of pneumonia. It was tragic, but for Don, it felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest. But the fear didn't end. His 3 older brothers, raised during better times, had grown bitter. They drank heavily, fought often, and sometimes turned their anger on Don. They saw him as weak and useless. One brother, nicknamed Shadow, was different. He joked, teased, and brought a sliver of light into Don's dark world. When Shadow died of an asthma attack, Don lost the only family member who had ever made him laugh. With no one left to lean on, Don turned inward. He created imaginary friends and made up stories in his head to cope. Eventually, he found ventriloquism. He built a dummy named Danny and started performing at churches, schools, and community events at just 15. It wasn't just for fun, it was an escape. It was the first time people clapped for him, not for his brothers, not even for the dummy, just for Don. He tried his luck in New York but failed, so he returned home and joined West Virginia University. Then came World War II. In 1943, at 19, he was drafted. People later believed he was a Marine drill instructor, but that was a myth. Don wasn't made for combat. He was too skinny, too nervous. The Army placed him in the 6,817th Special Services Battalion, where his job was to entertain the troops. He traveled from island to island in a military variety show called Stars and Gripes. At first, he used his dummy, Danny Hooch Matador, to entertain. But after 2 years, something shifted. He started feeling annoyed that people laughed more at the dummy than at him. It was supposed to be his act, but Danny kept stealing the spotlight. One night in 1945, while crossing the South Pacific on a ship, he picked up the dummy and threw it overboard. He imagined it screaming as it sank like it was alive. But he didn't regret it. That moment was like cutting a chain. He wasn't going to hide behind a puppet anymore. He was going to make people laugh as himself. Back home in January 1946, Don returned to West Virginia University using the GI Bill. He studied theater, acted in campus plays, and began sharpening the nervous, jittery character that would become his signature. This time, it was all him, no dummy. People started to notice. While studying, he met a woman named Catherine Metz. She was calm and thoughtful, very different from him. She was also engaged to someone else. But Don chased her anyway, and somehow it worked. They married in 1948, the same year Don graduated with a degree in theater. With $100 in a dream, Don left West Virginia for New York City. He hoped his military entertainment background would help, but New York didn't care. The city chewed him up. He auditioned endlessly for radio roles. Directors didn't reject him, they ignored him. He was a skinny, shaky guy from Morgantown, and nobody knew what to do with him. Meanwhile, bills piled up and confidence slipped away. He almost gave up, until his army connections gave him another lifeline. Slowly, he found work. By 1953, he landed a role in a national TV soap opera called Search for Tomorrow. He played Wilbur Peterson, a traumatized, neurotic character who only spoke to his sister. Don pulled from his own past, growing up poor with a mentally ill father, to bring the role to life. It was heavy, but he didn't back down. He appeared in nearly 500 episodes over 2 years, no matter how anxious or exhausted he felt. That role earned him respect and led to a Broadway show, No Time for Sergeants, where he met Andy Griffith. Around the same time, in 1954, Don also landed a small role on Howdy Doody, a children's show seen by millions. There, he played a twitchy character named Tim Tremble. The anxious, over-the-top energy made kids laugh, and adults noticed. It was a test run for what would later make him a household name. Behind the scenes, Don battled severe health anxiety. He constantly believed he was terminally ill. Panic attacks, trembling, and stomach issues plagued him, echoes of his childhood fears. To calm the storm, doctors prescribed barbiturates and tranquilizers, normal at the time. But soon, he needed them just to perform. While doing both Search for Tomorrow and Howdy Doody, he crumbled inside. He sometimes forgot lines. Directors noticed, but they worked around it. On camera, he delivered. Off camera, the pills dulled his mind and made his moods unpredictable. In 1956, everything changed. Don joined The Steve Allen Show, where his jittery, fidgety character finally caught fire. But it wasn't just made up. Years earlier, Don had seen a man at a banquet in West Virginia shake so badly that he spilled water all over himself. That image stuck with him. Later, it returned in a dream. Don woke up, wrote down the routine, and turned it into comedy gold. America started recognizing his face. From 1956 to 1959, Don appeared regularly on the show. When The Tonight Show moved to Hollywood in 1959, Don followed. Back in 1955, Don had played a small role in No Time for Sergeants on Broadway, where he and Andy Griffith first met. Their chemistry was undeniable. They acted together again in the 1958 film version, which earned over $7.6 million, massive for the time. On set, they shared more than lines, they shared ideas. Don learned how to be funnier by not being obvious. The nervous wreck who thought he was in control became his trademark. Then came the phone call that changed everything. On February 15, 1960, Don was at home watching TV. He saw Andy Griffith on The Danny Thomas Show, playing a small-town sheriff. It was the pilot for The Andy Griffith Show. Don picked up the phone and called Andy. They hadn't spoken in nearly 3 years. "Don't you think Sheriff Andy Taylor ought to have a deputy?" he asked. No agent, no audition, just a bold cold call. Andy loved the idea. He immediately set up a meeting with producer Sheldon Leonard. Time was on Don Knotts' side when his gig with Steve Allen was winding down. Within weeks, Don landed a new job that would change his life forever, playing Barney Fife. Many assumed Barney was just Don doing his usual nervous act, but the truth was more complex. Don transformed Barney into a fully realized character, jittery, yes, but also arrogant, overconfident, and convinced he knew everything, despite knowing very little. That contradiction made Barney unforgettable. Initially, the writers expected Andy Griffith to be the comedic star and Don to play the straight man. But by the second episode, Andy saw Don's brilliance and told the writers, "Don should be the comic and I'll play the straight man." That decision flipped the show on its head. Don poured himself into every aspect of Barney. His exaggerated walk, his high-pitched voice, the single bullet he kept in his pocket, and even the way he argued with Thelma Lou or irritated Andy. What could have been a throwaway character became the soul of the show. Audiences loved him. So did critics. From 1961 to 1963, Don Knotts won 3 consecutive Emmy Awards, not for lead actor, but for supporting. Yet many considered him the true heart of the Andy Griffith Show. His big eyes, frantic voice, and physical comedy were iconic. One moment Barney would be swaggering with fake confidence, and the next, he'd be crushed after accidentally firing his lone bullet into the ceiling, again. That mix of physical comedy and emotional vulnerability made him timeless. Barney wasn't just a bumbling fool. He saw himself as an expert in everything from judo to history to singing. He constantly tried to be the hero but often collapsed under pressure. His attempts to sing were usually disastrous, unless he sang softly with Andy, in which case it became oddly touching. Don played every one of those highs and lows with nuance. Then, at the peak of the show's success in 1965, Don shocked everyone by leaving. He believed the show would end after 5 seasons, as Andy had told him. So Don signed a 5-film deal with Universal Studios. But then Andy changed his mind. The show would continue. Don couldn't go back. He was already under contract, and it broke his heart. Barney's exit was written into the show. He got promoted and moved to Raleigh, but fans immediately felt the void. Though the Andy Griffith Show ran until 1968, many believed it was never quite the same. Don returned in 1966 and 1967 for a few guest appearances, which lit up the screen once again. He won 2 more Emmys just for those brief returns, bringing his total to 5, a record unmatched by any other supporting actor in a comedy. In 1986, Don put on the badge one last time in Return to Mayberry. Though older and slower, his charm was still intact. When Barney walked onto the screen again, it felt like no time had passed. Back in 1964, Don had stepped into leading man territory with The Incredible Mr. Limpet, a half-live-action, half-animated film where he played a man who turns into a fish and helps the Navy hunt Nazis. It was bizarre, but it showed that Don could carry a film. That same year, thinking the Andy Griffith Show was ending, he signed the Universal deal that would shape the next phase of his career. His first film under that deal, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, came out in 1966 and was a surprise hit. Made for just $670,000, it earned more than 5 times that amount and eventually grossed $100.1 million adjusted for inflation. Universal signed him for 5 years. Don followed up with The Reluctant Astronaut in 1967, which unfortunately released just 2 days before the tragic Apollo 1 fire. Then came The Shakiest Gun in the West in 1968, a remake of a Bob Hope comedy. His next attempt, The Love God, flopped hard. Audiences weren't ready to see him play a Hugh Hefner-type character running an adult magazine. Critics were harsh. By 1971, his final film in the Universal contract, How to Frame a Fig, failed to make an impact. Don's brand of clean, physical comedy was going out of style in an era of edgy, experimental films like Easy Rider and The Graduate. At 47, his film career was cooling. Then, in 1979, Three's Company came calling. They needed a new landlord. Don stepped in as Ralph Furley, the flashy, loud, clueless ladies' man. Cast members were nervous at first. John Ritter even admitted they were scared of him because he was such a legend. But Don brought a unique energy. Furley's outrageous outfits, exaggerated expressions, and delusions of coolness made him a fan favorite. When Suzanne Summers left in 1981, the writers gave Don more screen time, and he stayed until the show ended in 1984. Even after that, Don didn't fade away. He guest-starred on other sitcoms and returned to work with Andy Griffith on Matlock. He even voiced himself in animated shows like Scooby-Doo. But behind the laughs was a much darker story. Don's childhood was traumatic. His father, Jesse, struggled with mental illness and alcoholism. He once held a knife to Don's throat while Don was still in diapers. Jesse was eventually institutionalized and died when Don was 13. Only then did Don begin to feel safe enough to express himself. But the trauma left deep scars. His daughter, Karen, described his lifelong battle with depression. Even during his peak, Don often felt worthless. "I felt like a loser," he once admitted. That deep insecurity followed him into adulthood. In 1979, just as Three's Company was taking off, Don got devastating news. He was going blind. Diagnosed with macular degeneration at 57, he struggled to read scripts, recognize faces, and even drive. He spiraled into depression, withdrawing from others. His wife, Laura Lee, said he became obsessed with doing everything he could before he went completely blind. On set, he would panic and sometimes lock himself in his dressing room. Then came a miracle. Experimental surgery in 1982 improved his vision. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him hope. That hope wasn't enough to save his marriage. Laura Lee, tired of the mood swings and constant health fears, begged Don to see a therapist. He refused. The tension built until she finally filed for divorce. Then, in the early 2000s, another blow, lung cancer. He had quit smoking, but the damage was done. He didn't tell anyone at first, worried it would ruin future roles. Still, Don stayed Don, cracking jokes even after the diagnosis. He continued working, voicing characters like Mayor Turkey Lurkey in Chicken Little, 2005, and appearing in that 70s show. His final voice role came as Sniffer in Air Buddies, released after his death. What made Don's final years especially moving was his friendship with Andy Griffith. The two had met in 1955 on Broadway and built a bond that lasted a lifetime. Even after Don left the Andy Griffith Show in 1965, their friendship never wavered. When Don was dying, Andy flew in to visit him one last time. According to Don's brother-in-law, Andy was the last person to see him, besides close family. Ron Howard summed it up best: they had a deep and abiding respect for each other. Don Knotts passed away on February 24, 2006, at age 81. Lung cancer and pneumonia took him, but not before he left behind a legacy of laughter, humility, and heart. From his humble beginnings in West Virginia, through personal demons and public triumphs, he remained a true original, one of the most beloved and unforgettable characters in television history.